Acceptable Losses by Gav Thorpe. Captain on the flight deck. The assembled aircraft crews of the Imperial cruiser Divine Justice moved as one. Captain Krell strode into the vast hangar to the resounding clang of 100 boots stamping in near-perfect unison on the steel mesh decking. Walking 2 strides behind the stocky flag captain, Flight Commander Jaeger looked over his new comrades. Most were dressed in regulation fatigues. Standing smartly, they had been working or lounging before their commander's arrival. Jaeger's eyes were drawn towards a particular crowd off to one side, towards the rear of the aircraft bay. There was something surly about their bearing. Their uniforms were not quite so smart, their posture not so rigid as the other flight crews. Their attention not totally focused on the newly arrived captain. Instinctively, Jaeger knew that they were Raptor Squadron, his new command. That explained a couple of things at least. Krell's slightly amused look when he had greeted Jaeger earlier, and the glances from the other flight commanders during his initial introduction. So, the Raptors were in need of some discipline. Well, Jaeger would soon knock them into shape. Jaeger realized that Captain Krell was addressing the flight crews and turned his wondering mind into what his new commander was saying. And I expect every one of you to accord Flight Commander Jaeger the same amount of respect and cooperation you gave to his predecessor, Commander Glade. Proceed with your duties. We break for dock at 0500 hours. With a nod, the captain sent the gathered men back to work and turned to Jaeger. I see from your look that you've already spotted Raptor Squadron, he said plainly. Jaeger nodded slightly, keeping his expression as neutral as possible. They're not so bad as they might seem at first, Krell continued. There are some damn fine pilots there, and with the right man in charge, they'll make a fine showing. I think you're that man, Jaeger. I'll be watching your progress with interest. Thank you, sir, said Jaeger, replied. Pleased the captain had confidence in him. I don't think you'll have anything to worry about from Raptor Squadron. Go and meet your men then. I'll see you later. Give them a chance and they'll prove themselves worthy of the Emperor's navy. The 2 officers exchanged respectful bows before Krell turned on his heel and strode from the flight deck. Jaeger took in all the sights, sounds and smells of his new home. Although most flight decks had similarities, each always had a unique odour, a different edge on the lighting, variations in layout and 100 other small details with which made it special. The flight deck of the Divine Justice had space to carry, prepare and launch 10 of the massive Marauder bombers, along with a complement of 10 Thunderbolt fighters. All of the aircraft were currently in the docking bays, each nestling in its own arched alcove along the sides of the flight deck. Above the flight commander's head, a labyrinthine criss-cross of gantries and steps hung in the distant shadows, centered around a pair of enormous cranes capable of picking up and transferring the planes to the launching bays. The chatter of the flight crews filled the cavernous chamber with a constant murmuring, and the fragrances of the tech priest's augments and incense hung heavy in the air, mixed with the most mundane smell of oiled metal and human sweat. Taking a deep breath, Jaeger started towards his new flight crews. As he strode across the flight deck, Jaeger quickly inspected his new men more closely. Despite Krell's parting words, he was not impressed with what he saw. They slouched amidst a scattering of crates, idly passing the time, arguing heatedly, playing with dice, or just sprawling around relaxing. All but a few wore loose-fitting light grey fatigues, presenting a drab, uninspiring sight. Some of them turned to look at the new flight commander as he strode briskly over, and a couple managed to get to their feet. One of them, a gunner of Jaeger's own plane judging by his insignia, pulled himself upright and snapped off a sharp salute. "Fine day," proclaimed the gaunt-looking gunner. "May I welcome you to the auspicious role that is Flight Commander of Raptor Squadron." One of the others, a burly-looking bombardier, shot a murderous glance at the man. "Shut it, Sail. The new commander don't want to hear your creeping," the bombardier warned. His sweet-bearded brow knitted in a glowing scowl. "That's enough from you both," Jaeger snapped, irritated by their indiscipline. "Let something straight right from the start. I don't like you, any of you." Jaeger made a point of looking them over slowly. "From what I've seen already, you're a bunch of shoddy, undisciplined, no-hope slackers. Well, not any more. You will address me as Commander Jaeger. Unless directly addressed by me in non-combatant situations, you will only talk to me by first receiving permission in a manner of permission to speak, Commander Jaeger. Are those two simple facts absolutely clear?" The men looked at Jaeger in stunned disbelief. "I believe the words you are looking for are, 'Yes, Commander Jaeger,'" he prompted, eyebrows raised. Their reply was quiet and faltering at first, but it was a start. "Permission to speak, Commander Jaeger," came a quiet voice from one of the men around them. Jaeger looked at the flyer, who was stepping lightly between the others to stand in front of him. He was swathed in voluptuous robes that marked him out as one of the tech adepts, responsible for the mechanical and spiritual well-being of the planes, as well as the Zero itself. The man's neck was crisscrossed with wires and scar tissue, and the interface plug dangled from the back of his right hand. In battle, the tech adept would initially wire himself into the Marauder bomber, monitoring any damage and prompting the plane's repair mechanisms into action. "Granted," Jaeger said with a nod. "As I am principally a member of the Adeptus Mechanicus and only aligned to the efforts of the Imperial Navy by secondary venture, I consider your treatment of myself and the other tech adepts as subordinates in a very serious light," the tech adept said, his chin raised proudly to look the tall flight commander full in the face. Jaeger grabbed the man's robe, pulling him up until he was on the tip of his toes. The adept's hood fell back, exposing more bio-wiring. The coils of thin cable sprung from his shaven head like metallic hair, attached to his scalp through 100 scabrous incisions in his skin. Some of the others stepped forwards, but were stopped in their tracks by a murderous glance from their new commander. "While you fly my planes, I am your commanding officer," Jaeger snarled. "I don't care what rank you have in the worship of the machine god. On this flight deck and in the air, you answer to me. Make no mistake. I have every intention of turning this squadron into a respectable fighting unit. Cooperate and you may come through it with your lives and your rank. Go against me and I'll chew you up and spit out the pieces." Jaeger let go of the adept and stalked off, cursing himself for losing his temper. But if there was one thing that Jaeger hated, it was sloppiness. He had seen too many good men die because of another's carelessness, and he wasn't going to let it happen again. Jaeger ordered the men to stand down, pleased with their performance during the training session. As they sloped off to their communal sleeping chambers, Jaeger headed back towards the bunk room he shared with the other 3 flight commanders. Jaeger wiped the sweat from his face with the palm of his hand, and he was glad to be leaving the heat of the flight deck. warmed beyond tolerance by the bomber's engines. As he walked down the corridor towards the officers' quarters, Jaeger heard the clump of boots on the metal deck and turned. Marty, one of his gunners and a veteran for many years, jogged slowly up, saluting as he approached. "Permission to speak, Commander?" "Commander Jaeger?" the man asked cautiously. "What's on your mind, gunner?" "Excuse me for saying, but I don't reckon you're as hard-edged as you make out, sir." The gunner was sheepishly inspecting the back of his hands, avoiding Jaeger's stare. That is, the other lads and me, we were wondering how you ended up as our flight commander. I mean, what did you do wrong?" "What are you getting at, gunner?" Jaeger rested his hands on his hips. "And look at me when I speak to you," he added, annoying at having to address the top of the gunner's bald head. Marty looked up reluctantly to meet his gaze. It was obvious that the other crew members had put him up to this. "Well, getting stuck with the Raptors," the gunner explained, quietly. "I mean, you seem like you know what you're doing. So why did you end up in this dead-end assignment?" "Dead end?" "Raptor Squadron may not be spectacular, but you're all competent, dedicated men." "Why should this command be so bad?" Jaeger asked, genuinely puzzled. So you've not heard the stories, sir?" The gunner's face was a picture of incredulity. "I don't listen to rumour. I deal with fact and my own experiences," Jaeger snapped, annoyed that the gunner considered the flight commander the type to listen to scuttlebutt. "Very wise, sir," the old gunner said quickly. "Look, Raptors get the worst deal. It's that simple. If there's some dirty work to be done, we'll get it. You must have seen the records. We've got the highest loss rate for the last 3 tours. That idiot Glade didn't help either. Emperor rot him." To Jaeger, the gunner was making no sense at all. "What about the other marauders?" he asked. "Devil Squadron." "The Devils?" The gunner laughed, a short and bitter noise. "They don't know the meaning of the word hard work. Flight Commander Raff is Admiral Veniston's nephew, if you take my meaning." The veteran gunner was shaking his head, as if he were surprised that the flight commander's ignorance had reached a new level. Jaeger had had enough of being treated like a naive youth who had just been earned his commission. "You and all those other spurious gossips that rest assured that by the time I'm finished, Devil Squadron will be polishing our boots," he promised, his voice hard, his eyes boring into the gunner. "Remember, a crew is only as good as they think they are. Captain Krell is behind me on this. All you need is a morale boost, and things will fall into place. Now go and get some rest." The old gunner hesitated for a moment, giving his commander a doubtful look before hurrying down the corridor, leaving Jaeger to his thoughts. Raptor Squadron wasn't inherently bad, the flight commander mused. They're just starting believing the things that were said about them. If it was true that the Admiral's favouritism for his nephew was costing lives, he'd had a few things to say about that. For now, all he could do was watch and wait and hope that things weren't bad as they seemed. Emperor's blood! That's the sight to set a man's heart trembling, Admiral Veniston exclaimed. Only 8 weeks into the patrol, the Divine Justice had run into serious trouble. Magnified on the main display screen of the Divine Justice's bridge was a scene of utter destruction, the like of which the aging officer had not witnessed for many years. The terrible wreckage of a Navy cruiser. What little remained spun slowly across the stars. In the distance could just be made out the dark shape of an orc hulk, the source of the carnage. One of the command crew looked up from the glowing green readout in front of him. Surveyors identify her as the Imperial Retribution, Admiral. 80% structural damage. She's taken one hell of a pounding, the crewman reported. Veniston nodded. Aye, she has. And the question is, how do we avoid a similar fate? Commander Krall took a step forward, a glint in his eye. I suppose dropping back into the warp and forgetting we found her is out of the question. As the command crew chuckled, Veniston directed Krall into the conference chamber with a flick of his head. Within a small wood-panelled room, the two were able to speak more freely. It was Veniston who spoke first. Seriously, Jacob? How the hell are we going to take out that damn Hulk? The tech priest made a long-range assay. The captain activated a comm screen and brought up a rough schematic of the Hulk. The bulk of the weapon systems are located near the front. If we could come at it from the rear, we could probably give her enough of a pounding while limiting the return fire. As he spoke, Krall drew his finger over the screen in a wide circle to finish pointing out at the Hulk's main engine block. The Admiral frowned. There's only us and the frigates. We can't take her on from more than one direction without being taken apart piecemeal. If she can bring her guns to bear, even the Divine Justice won't survive for very long. Just how do you suggest we get the green-skinned scum on that Hulk to sit still long enough for us to let rip with the torpedoes and batteries, Jake? Krall rubbed his short-cropped beard. With the press of a rune, he imposed a series of arrows and notations onto the diagram of the Hulk. Well, now as you mention it, he said, I have one idea. The Orcs won't have a problem hitting something the size of the Divine Justice, but that doesn't mean they're invulnerable. The order to prepare for launch had been issued an hour ago. Now the flight crews were hurrying to finish their last task. Jaeger's second in command, Frau, was leading the crew in prayer, kneeling his head bowed beneath the fuselage of the Marauder. Chanting hymns with admirable concentration, Jaeger looked up to where Arik, one of the dorsal gunners, was clambering around on top of the Marauder's fuselage. What's with them? Jaeger called up. Arik looked down from where he was polishing the twin barrels of his autocannon atop the spine of the Marauder. Do it every time. Supposed to bring the Emperor's blessing, the gunner called down. I guess that. But why beneath the Marauder? Isn't it more practical to do it in the open? Arik shrugged. Although the movement could hardly be seen inside the thick folds of the vacuum suit he was wearing. Meant to bring the Emperor's power through the plane. You know the score. You must have seen the other crews doing something like that before every flight. A special ritual. Like Gerald reading out the Articles of War, and me polishing this damn big gun. Though I know the maintenance crews have oiled it plenty, since we got our orders. Surprised you don't do something like that yourself. Yes, you're right. There is something I nearly forgot, Jaeger replied, distractingly. Standing in front of the massive Marauder, Jaeger called his crew to gather in front of him, ready for briefing. His gaze turned to the nose of the craft and the gilded eagle rampart that shone from it. The design was repeated on the gloves of his dress uniform and printed on all of their helmets. It was the blazon of the Raptor Squadron. A fine name. But was it a fine crew? As the crew congregated, he looked at each of them in turn. Over the 2 months that had passed since leaving the dock at Bacca, he had come to know the men better, although only real combat would show him their real mettle. There were the gunners, Arik and Marty and Sale. Each had proven his accuracy on the simulation ranges, but word was that Arik lost his cool in the heat of battle, and Sale was basically a coward. Still, trust not in rumour, Jaeger's old captain on the Invincible had taught him. The tech adept, Ferrex, had been no problem since Jaeger's rough treatment of his fellow Adeptus Mechanicus at the first encounter. Ferrex was frowning, however, as he climbed down from the Marauder's engines, obviously annoyed that his attempts to consecrate the Marauder to the machine god had been interrupted. Jaeger would give him the time to finish his ritual before they launched. There were enough variables to worry about without offending the Marauder's spirit with hastily ceremonies and hurried prayers. The last over was Berhart, the bullying, muscle-bound bombardier. For all his rough accent and large frame, the flyer had a shrewd mind. He'd have to be watched, however, Jaeger had decided, since much of the pessimism of the squadron seemed to originate from him, one way or the other. Once all 5 of his crew were present, Jaeger stepped onto an empty munitions crate that servitors had not yet moved. Clearing his throat, he spoke out strongly and surely, wanting to instill his crew with the confidence that they demanded. If they didn't believe him now, their hesitation or doubt could get them all killed once they were in battle. As you know, many bomber crews have certain customs to ensure the Emperor's grace and no bad luck. Well, there is something of a tradition for me, a little ceremony I go through before my first combat flight with a new squadron, just to make sure nothing bad happens to any of us. Don't worry. It doesn't take very long, Jaeger assured them. Seeing their distracted gazes, they wanted him to get on with his little pep talk as quickly as possible, and he could empathise with that. It's an old tale from my home planet. I come from X2, in case you hadn't heard already. Bit of a backwater by many of your standards, but we've a strong sense of honour and courage, so I'll not be running away from any fights. Jaeger saw nods of agreement from Marty and Arik. The others shuffled their feet uneasily, embarrassed by being told a story. Not all cultures were like the one on X2, Jaeger knew. In some societies, tales were seen as childish rather than important teachings for adult and children alike. Though he sometimes cursed others for their ridiculous habits or customs in the years of service in the Emperor's navy, Jaeger had learned to accept all manner of viewpoints and outlooks on life. Anyway, to my tale. As told to me by Faithsayer Gernth, it tells of a great emperor eagle whose claws are sheathed with fire and whose eyes are all-seeing, and of how he banished the Chaos Serpent from our realm. One day, the Chaos Serpent, the eternal enemy of the Emperor Eagle, steals one of the sacred eggs from the Emperor's Eagle's nest while he is away hunting. The Chaos Serpent takes the egg back to her lair and wraps herself about the egg to keep it warm. To make sure it incubates, when the Emperor Eagle returns, great is his dismay to find one of the sacred eggs missing. He searches far and wide, but he cannot see the missing sacred egg. Meanwhile, the egg hatches, and the young eagle is welcomed into this world by the Chaos Serpent. "Greetings," says the Chaos Serpent. "I am your mother. You will learn what I teach you and listen to my every word." And the eagle learnt the foul, twisted ways of the Chaos Serpent. Jaeger looked over his men, pleased to see that they were all paying attention now. Even Ferrex, whose own religious beliefs taught him to worship machines over humans. The young eagle's radiant golden feathers were tarnished with spite. Jaeger's mouth twisted in disgust as he pictured the fallen eagle in his mind. His glistening eyes were misted with false hope, and his claws were blunted by disobedience. All the while, the Emperor Eagle continued his search, seeking ever further for his lost sacred egg. At last, one day he came across the eagle, now fully grown, and at first the Emperor Eagle was glad, but as he spoke to the lost eagle, and saw what he had become, the Emperor Eagle became most displeased. He commanded the young eagle to remain where he was and sought out the Chaos Serpent. He found the treacherous false creature hiding in the shadows nearby, but the Emperor's eagle's keen eyes still spotted her. Jaeger half closed his eyes, remembering the first time he had heard the tale when he was a small child. The next part was his favourite, and had served to inspire him all the way through his upbringing by the Schola Progenium, and through his flight training at Bacca. It was this that had first given him his ambition to be a pilot, and when times had been hard, he told himself the story in his mind. Each time it gave him strength to persevere through his hardships. As the other flight crews had finished their pre-flight rituals, they had drifted over to listen to the flight commander's speech. Now all 29 of them stood in front of him, gripped by his words. Taking a deep breath, Jaeger continued. Swooping down upon his massive pinions, the Emperor Eagle seized the Chaos Serpent in his flame-wreathed talons and swept the Chaos Serpent high into the air. For a long time they flew. "Why do you attack me so?" inquired the Chaos Serpent in feigned ignorance and innocence. "You have taken one of my own from me," said the Emperor Eagle, "and twisted it with your dark ways so that it is no longer tall and proud and fulfilling its righteous destiny. That is crime for which there can be no mercy." And the Emperor Eagle dropped the Chaos Serpent into the bottomless dark pit that is the Eye of Terror, condemning the Chaos Serpent to eternal imprisonment, agony and torment for what she had done to the young eagle. Pausing a moment for dramatic effect, he could see the tale was having the desired effect on the assembled crewmen. The men were listening with rapt attention now, and for a moment would listen to, and more importantly, believe anything he cared to tell them. His own pride was inspiring them, giving them the confidence to follow him wherever he led them. The Emperor Eagle returned to his offspring, Jaeger continued, his intense gaze meeting the stare of each of the men in turn. "You have been done a great wrong," the Emperor Eagle said. "May that much greater, for I cannot correct it, but can only punish the guilty. There are no amends to be made. You are my child, and yet I cannot suffer you to live now. Twisted and malignant that you are." The young eagle looked at the Emperor Eagle, and the nobility of his birth rose through the filth of the Chaos Serpent's false teachings. "I understand, O great Emperor Eagle." And the young eagle bent back his head to show the breast to the Emperor Eagle. With one sweep of his flame-wreathed claws, the Emperor Eagle tore out the young eagle's heart, burning it to ashes, for none can live that have been touched by the Chaos Serpent, not even the children of the Emperor Eagle. The sycophantic gunner, Sale, clapped enthusiastically. A few smiled in grim appreciation, while the rest awaited with explanation, with dutiful silence. "For we are the talons of the Emperor," Jaeger said, his voice deep and full of conviction. His right hand unconsciously making the shape of a grasping claw across his chest. Just as this ship is named the Divine Justice, so too must we be the instrument of the Emperor's vengeance. No mercy, no forgiveness. Just the surety of swift justice and sure death. Swift justice, sure death was the squadron's motto. And hearing it spoken so confidently, with such emotion, had a startling effect on the crew. Jaeger could see their anticipation, eager for battle, like they had never been before. They had pride in themselves, for the first time in years. So, what are we? Jaeger yelled, his hand now raised in a fist. Swift justice, sure death! Came the replying cry from the 29 throats. It echoed around the flight bay, making the crews of the other squadrons turn in surprise. Jaeger grinned, his heart beating fast. Damn right! Let's give the enemy a taste of the Emperor's claws. Jaeger grinned as he gazed out of the cockpit's canopy and saw the rest of the squadron flying alongside the ship's hull, each pushed forward on quadruple tails of plasma. Beyond them, he saw the firing ports of the Divine Justice's gun decks opening slowly, revealing battery upon battery of massive laser cannons, mass drivers, and plasma projectors. Immense firepower, enough to destroy a city. The comlink in Jaeger's helmet cracked into life. Thunderbolt fighter squadrons, Arrow and Storm ready for rendezvous, the familiar voice of Flight Commander Dextra, giving a metallic grate over the long-range communicator. Jaeger flicked the blast transmute rune on the comlink panel to the left. Good to hear, Jace. Take up the diamond, 10, on the aft quarters. Affirm, Raptor Leader. As the small fighters took up their escorting positions around the bomber squadron, Jaeger increased the throttle, taking the plane to the front to form a flying V formation, with his Marauder as the arrowhead. The craft swept over the prow of the cruiser, looking like tiny flares of light against the backdrop of the immense torpedo tubes. Bridge, this is Raptor Leader formed up and ready to attack. Awaiting target data by the Emperor, Jaeger reported. Bernhant gave a thumbs-up signal, and the target information was transmitted from the Divine Justice. The bombardier's gruff voice gave Jaeger the details of the internal communicator. It's at a point of the rear of the Hulk, in the engine somewhere. Can't tell what it is exactly this far out. What do you mean? Jaeger asked. Just what I said, sir. It's just some coordinates, no details of the target type, and a notion that says the attack trajectory is at your discretion. Very well. Inform me as soon as we get further details, Jaeger replied, before addressing the rest of the squadron. Listen up, Raptors. This is the real thing. No bickering, no whining, and no stalling. I'm going to let you get me and your flight comrades killed. We're here to blow things up in the name of the Emperor. And that's what we're damn well going to do. Jaeger smiled as he heard the laughter of the other crew members come over his headset. Sitting back into the pilot's seat, he began to relax. It would be a while before they were anywhere near within range of the Hulk's considerable defences. And, being tense for 2 hours, was sure to do this reaction no good. Not to mention the nerves of his crew. To occupy his mind, Jaeger went through pre-battle checks once again. He ran his eyes over the cockpit's interior to check everything visually. There were no chinks or scratches on the tinted armoured shielding of the Marauder's cockpit. The snaking wrist-thick pipes that twisted from the control panel in all directions seemed to be intact, with no insulation breaks or kinks. The pressure gauges of the engine had their needles pointing comfortably in the green quadrants, and numerous other dials, meters and counters indicated that nothing was amiss. Jaeger tested the flight controls, worried by the stiffness he was feeling in the movement of the control column. A few gentle turns and rolls later, and everything seemed fine. easing Jaeger's suspicions. Bernhant had told him that this marauder had been almost cut in half by an elder laser during its last mission. It had been then that his predecessor, Glade, had been sucked out into the void, never to be seen again. Jaeger cursed himself for such morbid thoughts, and to calm himself, he began to think of his homeworld. Unfastened a couple of catches, Jaeger pushed his helmet onto the back of his head and closed his eyes. With a thin-lipped smile, he began whistling a hunting chant from back home. Veniston paced back and forth across the command deck of the bridge, watching the various screens that gave updates of the progressing battle. As the Divine Justice slowly moved in closer to the Hulk, the smaller Orc ships in its escort were trying to break through the cordon of frigates to attack the cruiser. They were having little success, and the one or two that managed to get within range were soon obliterated by the overwhelming firepower of the Divine Justice's gun decks. The floor shook with regular throbs as the immense plasma drivers pushed the ship towards the distant foe, bringing all board ever closer to the death or glory. One of the communications officers was muttering sharply to Captain Cruel while he glanced over his subordinate's shoulder at the flickering screen, directing the efforts of the escorts and fighters. "Is there a problem, Mr. Cruel?" Veniston inquired as he stepped up to the captain, trying to keep the tension from his voice. "Not really, sir," Cruel answered, standing up straight to look the Admiral in the eye. Veniston raised an eyebrow with query. "There's a wave of Orc fighter bombers which has made it through the blockade. They'll be intercepting the marauders of Raptor Squadron shortly, but the fighter screens should be able to protect our bombers," Cruel assured the Admiral, rubbing his tiredness from his eyes and running a thick-fingered hand through his dark hair. "Send the Thunderbolts on an interception course," Veniston decided, looking past Cruel at the display screen. "If the Orcs get too close, the bombers will have to slow down, and timing is all important. If the Raptors don't attack in time, the whole plan will be off course, and the Hulk will still be fully mobile when they get within range. We can't let that happen, Jacob." The Admiral's eyes narrowed, and his jaw clenched tightly for the moment, as he considered the prospect of the Divine Justice suffering the same fate as the Imperial Retribution. "What if a second wave of fighters comes up? They'll be unprotected," the captain protested, his voice suddenly hoarse with the prospect. "If that happens," Veniston stated coldly, "then we shall pray that the Emperor is watching over them." The Admiral turned towards the main display again, indicating that the conversation was ended. Cruel suppressed a grimace and turned towards the awaiting comms officer. "New orders for Arrow and Storm squadrons," the captain began. Their Thunderbolt escort had peeled away regretfully a few minutes ago, and now the marauders were all on their own. As Raptor Squadron thundered towards the Hulk, more details of the battle ahead could be seen. A swarm of Orc attack ships duelled with the frigates escorting the Divine Justice. Manoeuvring just outside range of the Orcs' crude weapons, the Imperial ships were taking a heavy toll. The wreckage of at least 5 Orc vessels were drifting lifelessly across the battle zone. Much closer now, the Hulk seemed truly immense. Around it orbited a cluster of defense asteroids, floating bases crewed by the Orcs and bristling with rockets and gun batteries. Some were simple pieces of the Hulk that had broken off and hadn't escaped the pull of the Hulk's gravity. Others, Jaeger had been taught in command training, were deliberately captured by the Orcs, who used bizarre field technology to grasp onto asteroids and debris, purposely creating a swirl of obstacles to protect them against attack. Whatever the cause of their orbit, and whether they were just floating chunks of stone and metal, or had been fitted out with rocket pods or gun turrets, throughout the Navy they were known simply as rocks. As Jaeger considered the glorious example of understatement, there was a sudden hiss of escaping gas, and the control stick in his left hand started juddering uncontrollably. "Ferrix!" Jaeger screamed over the internal comms link. "These damn controls are playing up. I need stability now, if you don't mind." The small tech addict crawled into his cockpit and took a tool belt from his waist, pulling a glowing gold-etched device from one pocket. He set about the fastenings on a panel under Jaeger's legs as Ferrix unscrewed the compartment beneath the control column. He began a low-voiced chant. To see the spirit of the machine that is to be Mechanicus, to find the malaise of malfunction that is to be Mechanicus, to administer the right of repair that is to be Mechanicus. Jaeger let the man drift from his attention as he looked through the armoured glass of his cockpit. The frigates had done a good job punching a hole through the Orc attack ships, leaving the way clear for the marauders. However, something wasn't quite right. Jaeger's spine tingled with some inner sense of foreboding. Looking at the approaching hulk, a sinister suspicion began to rise at the back of his mind. "Burnhand, can you get a fix of that rock? 5 o'clock, about 12 by 35? Jaeger asked the bombardier, with unease rising. "Got it," the bombardier replied, a question in his voice. "Plot a trajectory prediction. Impose over our course." "Okay, Commander." Jaeger. "Processing right now. Coming through." "Damn! You were right to ask, sir. We're heading straight for that damn thing," Bernhardt exclaimed. "Avoidance course?" Jaeger knew that there wouldn't be one, even as he asked. "No, sir. Not with the time we've been given. Emperor's mercy. We're going to have to deal with the bloody thing ourselves." The bombardier's voice was barely a whisper. Jaeger's pressed the long-range communicator. "Bridge, this is Raptor Leader," he announced. "We have a problem." The bomber squadron banked round slowly. Shaken by the engine blast of the vast rocket soaring past, each of the Orc missiles roared from the rock, was larger than the Marauder, designed to blow apart a massive starship, but equally capable of wiping out a whole squadron with one unlucky blast. Crude faces had been painting on the tips of the monstrous rockets, leering grins and sharp-teethed devils, seeming to leap from the darkness on columns of raging flame. Jaeger was listening to the comnet, his mood grim. "This is Apollo. We cannot disengage currently. This is Glorious. Unable to reach your position in time." And so it went on. Each of the fleet's frigates were too busy or too far away to attack the rapidly approaching rock. Another flare erupted from the Orc defence platform in front of the Marauders, hurling 6 more rockets at the incoming bombers. Jaeger switched to the inter-squadron communicator. "Split 1-4 on my lead," he ordered, his low voice and abrupt. "We've only got time for one pass. Make it count." As the icon flashed green on the panel beside him, Jaeger switched frequently to listen to the incoming message. "This is Tech Piece Andromaz of the Excellent," a tinny, unfamiliar voice reported. "We have surveyed your target and established a primary detonation point. Transmitting information now. It appears to be some kind of power source, which may destroy the target if you can hit it. It would make your departure as expeditious as possible, though we are unsure how large the result blast will be." "Thanks, Adromas," Jaeger replied, turning to see Bernhand had received the information. The bombardier gave a nod as the targeting data for the rock's reactor was received, and with the turn of a dial and a flicked switch he transmitted the details to the other Marauders. Bernhand swiveled in his seat to grasp the forked control stick that guided and fired the Marauders' nose-mounted las cannons. One shot from those could punch through a cubit or more of reinforced armour and smash apart rock with equal ease. "Signals to suggest it ain't laser shielded," the bombardier said, smiling grimly. "A couple of good hits should do the trick." Jaeger broadcast to the rest of the squadron again. "Las cannons only on this one. Save your missiles and bombs for the main target." Frau's voice came back first. "What do you mean, main target?" Ain't this what we're here to destroy? This is just incredential, Jaeger snapped back. Our main objectives is on the Hulk itself. You're joking! 5 Marauders are going to have as much effect on that beast as a swamp fire blighting a Grox's backside, Drake chipped in. Jaeger barely suppressed a scowl before opening up the comm channel. We don't make the orders, we just follow them. If you have a problem with that, we can sort it out back on the flight deck. We've got a job to do. So let's just stay calm. We'll deal with this rock and we'll push out on our main objective. If we get that far, Frow's voice, even taking the hiss of the comnet into account, with rasping and bitter, damn Raptor's luck. Jaeger stabbed at the transmit rune. Silence, all of you, he snapped. Everyone listen to me right now. You all know your jobs, you've all flown combat missions before, so I'll hear no more of this Raptor's luck. Is that understood? A series of affirmations were broadcast back to Jaeger's. Nodded to himself. Doubt sows the seeds of fear. The abbot of the Exdu Schola Progedium had taught him when he was young. Crush it at birth or suffer the growth of heresy. Flickering his gaze over the control panel, Jaeger saw all the systems were working within acceptable levels. Everything was ready. He took a deep breath, his hand poised over the comlink, letting it slowly. He touched the rune. Raptor Squadron, this is Raptor Leader. Jaeger made his voice deliberately calm, even though inside his heart was racing and he could feel the excitement of combat beginning to surge. Break and attack! Break and attack! A dozen small turrets swiveled into firing position and unleashed a torrent of shells at the Marauders as they screamed in towards the rock, their engines at full burn. Dodging through a hail of death, now was the time for each pilot to prove his worth. Gerald took the lead, followed by Jaeger, then the other bombers. From his position, Jaeger had the perfect opportunity to see the magnificent Marauder bomber in action. They were huge metallic beasts, each weighing more than 3 battle tanks with a wide wingspan. Designed for limited range space combat as well as atmospheric missions, the Marauder manoeuvred with small vectoring engines along the fuselage and wings, whilst in the ether, and massive control planes and a quad ramjet that they dipped into the planet's atmosphere. Nicknamed Big Brutes by the flight crews, each Marauder was a flying fortress. Its 2 dorsal twin autocannons were capable of unleashing a hail of fire that could punch through the armour of enemy planes and tear apart crew and engines, while the tail gunner's triple heavy bolters could fire a dozen shells a second at enemy interceptors or strafe soft ground targets. On the nose were the las cannons for precision targeting, a 6 flail missiles hung from the wings, each with a plasma warhead capable of creating a crater over 50 feet in diameter or cracking the armoured hull of a spaceship. For some more wholesale devastation, the Marauder's hull also incorporated a spacious bomb bay which could deliver a payload of explosives or incendiaries. As he contemplated the sheer destructive potential of just a single Marauder, Jaeger found his faith in the Imperium renewed. The Adeptus Mechanicus had designed this awesome fighting machine. The Schola Progenium of the Ministorum had given him the fervent faith to serve the Emperor. The Imperial Navy had taught him how to control this murderous creature of metal, and now he was here, once more about to deliver fiery judgment upon the heads of the Emperor's enemies. For Jaeger, there was no finer feeling. As Raptor Squadron roared closely to the rock, the enemy's response grew in ferocity. With stomach-churning suddenness, Jaeger pulled up from the dive towards the rock, bringing the Marauder's nose level with the horizon of the small asteroid. Where a second before he had been flying in open space, now there was ground beneath him. As always, it took a couple of seconds to fight off the disorientation, and while he took a few deep breaths, he subconsciously sent the Marauder into a series of short climbs, dives and banks to throw off the enemy's guns. Glancing hits ricocheted around the armoured hull, filling the air with sporadic metal clangs A close hit set the plane shaking, and warning runes flashed red across 3 of the control panels that covered every surface of the cockpit. Ferrix's voice sounded over the common alarm. Armour breach, check your vacuum seals. And up the 3rd canticle of protection. Praise his name. Jaeger went through the routine of checking and fastening on his helm, muttering under his breath, Deliver me from the void. Protect me from the ether. Guard well my soul. The bombers were almost within firing range, and had slackened as some of the rock's gun turrets were blindsided by the mass of the asteroid. A surprise burst of fire engulfed Yeryl's plane, stripping away great shards of metal. Frau's plane swept low, its lascannons blasting apart the Orc gunnery turret. Exacting instant revenge, Jaeger could see a gaping hole in the starboard wing of Gerald's Marauder, trailing sparks as severed power cables discharged their energy into the vacuum. Raptor 3, what is your condition? Jaeger inquired urgently. Lost starboard controls. Handling shaky. I don't think I can hold it. Permission to disengage. Okay, Gerald. Break off and return home, Jaeger said through gritted teeth. Suddenly, the Comsnet icon flashed for a priority message. This is Admiral Veniston. Do not disengage, Raptor 3. Circle round and reform for attack on primary objective. Gerald's reply came through a hiss of static. Wait, what? The damn controls? Order received. Jaeger watched as the lead Marauder pulled up, taking it out of the attack run, easing his control column left and right. Jaeger steered his craft through the shells, screaming towards him, guiding the Marauder over the steep lip of a crater. Jaeger saw the reactor housing for the first time, a crude conglomeration of twisted pipes and power relays. Bernhant gave a grunt as the York's power generator came within range of his las cannons. Bolts of laser energy flashed towards the rock, sending up plumes of smoke and dust. Bernhant's las cannons spat forth volley after volley, tearing through metal and rock. Emperor's blood! Missed! Cursed Bernhant, punching his fist against the las cannon controls. Twisting in his seat as he steered the Marauder away, Jaeger watched as Frau's bomber came into pass. As the craft swept towards its target, leaving a trail of swirling debris in its wake, 2 bolts of light struck the reactor, full on, turning the generator's armour into a molten slurry and punching through the highly unstable plasma chamber within. Spot on! Frau shouted gleefully. Pull away! Jaeger's left arm ached as he wrenched the column back and right, pulling the Marauder into a spine-bending turning climb. Through the side screens, Jaeger could see small eruptions breaking up across the rock as a chain reaction spread from the reactor to the turrets and rocket batteries. Forks of electrical energy began to arc into the air as the reactor went into critical overload. A cloud of gas exploded through the rock's surface from an underground tank, sending shards of rock spinning dangerously close to the following Marauders. Before the gas was eaten up by a shaft of blue flame, raw plasma spewed from the molten remains of the generator, pushing the rock off its trajectory, sending it spinning further away from the hulk. With an explosion that momentarily blinded the flight commander, the rock burst apart, sending fragments of debris hurling in every direction. The victorious cries of Jaeger's crew and the other pilots rang in his ears. Steady, Raptors! That was just a warm-up, Jaeger chided them. Now for the real target. Form up. Gerald, take the rear. Affirmative, Gerald responded. Where for now, sir? Jaeger grimaced to himself. Not sure, he answered slowly. We haven't received full target information yet. Damn it, he thought to himself. The whole mission briefing was hazy. This whole thing was beginning to stink. But of what? He wasn't yet certain. Let's get this straight, Frau's voice was heavy with sarcasm. We don't know what we're attacking, and we've just got a deadline to meet? That's it? We just fly in there, easy as you like, drop a few bombs, fire a few shots and go home? Somehow I don't think it will be that easy. Cut the chatter, Jaeger ordered, his mood grim. He agreed with the other pilots, but he'd be damned if he'd be going to sow doubt on the command skills of Crawl and Venison halfway through a mission. The Marauders roared onwards, the hulk glowing ever larger through the cockpit's windows. Its massive bulk blocked out a swathe of stars, looking like some lurking shadow, waiting to swallow up the Marauders, luring them to their doom. Captain Crawl coughed gently to attract the Admiral's attention. The senior officer pulled his gaze from the monitoring station and turned around, one eyebrow raised in question. "We are in a position to initiate the second attack wave, Lord Venison." The Admiral rubbed one haggard cheek with his hand, gazing at nothing in particular. "Sir, shall we proceed?" Crawl pressed. Veniston's eyes were flints. "Very well, Jacob. Launch Devil Squadron. Proceed with the attack on the engines themselves." With the debris of the rocks scattering slowly in their wake, the Marauders headed onwards and towards the hulk. Pressing a series of runes above his head, Jaeger turned on a small view screen just above the front canopy, and a flickering, fractured image of the view behind the bomber crackled into existence. The flight commander watched as the Divine Justice moved in towards the hulk, its awesome plasma drives pushing it forward on 20-mile long trails of fire. The two surviving frigates formed up in front of the cruiser, ready to defend their capital ship against the few remaining Orc attack ships. Jaeger could picture the commotion on board the massive warships as gun and torpedo crews scurried to and fro, readying their weapons for action. He imagined the gun decks bathed red in combat lighting, the gunners sweating and cursing as they heaved power cells into place, or loaded shells the size of his bomber into the breaches. In the torpedo bays, hundreds of men would be bending their backs to the chains, hauling the massive projectiles 10 times the size of a Marauder along the loading rails in the engine bay. The men would be sweating heavily, the heat of the 30 plasma reactors permeating even through their thermal shielding and crew's protective suits. He didn't envy them their task. Hard work is in very cramped conditions for little recognition or reward. Moreover, pilots were all volunteers, while many of the thousands of men who laboured in the depths of the fighting ships were criminals serving their penance to the Emperor, or simply unfortunate men taken unawares by the press gangs. And yet, he thought, everyone serves the Emperor, each in their own way. They will receive their due honours in time, whether in this life or not. Something caught Jaeger's attention from the corner of his eye. But before he had a chance to look properly, Arafa was screaming in his ear, "Incoming! Orc fighter bombers moving into interception vector! Closing fast! Where's our damn fighter screen?" Jaeger was transmitting even before Arafa had finished. "Storm leader, arrow leader." He grasped throat dry with sudden fear. "This is Raptor leader. We need cover and fast. We have..." Jaeger checked the display in front of him. 8 fighter bombers incoming. "Okay, Jaeger." The fighter commander came through immediately. "We're on our way. Arrow leader out." "Everyone, keep sharp," Jaeger ordered over the squadron comms link. "Gunners, mark your targets. Watch for the crossfire. Tight formation. Don't let them get in amongst us. Drake, you're uppermost. Cover the blind sides." Jaeger forced himself to calm down, loosening his white-knuckled grip on the control column. He kept his gaze firmly on the slivers of light that marked the approaching Orcs. Now was the first time to trust in his gunners. The Orcs were jinking and swerving as they closed in on the Raptor squadron, surrounded by a cloud of tracer shells and pulses of laser light as the Marauder guns opened fire. Each enemy craft was different, haphazardly constructed from crudely cut and bent metal plates, pushed screaming across the stars by hugely oversized engines, and spluttered multicoloured trails. Each was decorated differently too, some painted in bold stripes of red and black or red and yellow, others embellished with Orc glyphs that were indecipherable to Jaeger. Others still just as mess of jagged patterns and bold colours, blazing cannons protruding from the nose of each interceptor, and their wings were hung with bombs and missiles. The marauders were flying close into each other, relying upon the mass of fire to drive off the attack rather than trying to evade the much more manoeuvrable Orc attack craft. Their gunners covered each other's blind spots, trying to keep up the almost impenetrable wall of fire that was needed to keep the fighters at bay until the Divine Justice's interceptors could arrive. "Got one!" Arik shouted from behind Jaeger as the Orc fighter exploded in a billowing cloud of shrapnel and rapidly burning fuel. Then the fighters screamed within range, raking along the length of Drake's plane, sending splinters of metal flying. A few stray rounds ricocheted off the shield in front of Jaeger, causing him to flinch, but the armoured glass held out against the impacts. As the enemy swept overhead, the dorsal guns and the marauders swiveled to track them, spraying salvo after salvo of fire into the Orc formation. Though the armoured view panel to the left, Jaeger saw one of the craft caught in a crossfire by Frau and Drake's gunners. The enemy's cockpit shattered, causing it to tumble out of control towards Gerald's stricken marauder. As the bomber laboriously swung out of harm's way, its damaged wing twisted until it sheared off completely. Lurching out of formation, the marauder flipped madly out of control and was suddenly in the centre of a devastating crossfire from the Orcs. Jaeger averted his gaze, but in his mind's eye he could picture the lifeless bodies of the crew drifting out towards the stars. With Gerald's covering fire lost, the Orc fighter bombers closed in on the rear of Raptor's squadron. Twisting nimbly between the volleys of fire from the tail gunners, the situation was looking grim. The Orcs could simply pick them off one by one now that the formation was disrupted. If they just carried on flying straight towards the target, they'd be sitting ducks and wouldn't last more than a couple of minutes. "Break formation for dogfight," Jaeger ordered. "Drake, Arifa, circle round and get..." Jaeger's orders were interrupted by a message from the Divine Justice. "This is Admiral Veniston. Maintain formation. Proceed toward primary target without delay." Jaeger gripped the control column, trying to quell his rising fury. Was Veniston deliberately trying to get them killed? He stabbed at the comnet button again. "This is Jaeger. Repeat. Break formation. Take out these damned Orcs, or we can forget about our target." As the marauders pulled away from each other, Jaeger dragged his plane round in a tight circle, the control column juddering in his hands. Bernhant was crouched over his las cannon controls, staring intensely through the firing visor for a target. Jaeger spotted a fighter expertly trailing Drake's weaving marauder. Jaeger brought his own craft down above the Orc craft, glancing across to check that Bernhardt was ready. The slicing beams of the bombardier's las cannons were joined by Arik's fire from above their heads. It tore the tail off the Orc fighter and sent it listing off uselessly, fountains of sparks spraying from its ruptured fuselage. The rattle of shells against the hull snapped Jaeger's attention to his left, where another enemy bomber was roaring towards him, its cannons blazing away. Something punched through the hull just behind him. The flight commander, and he heard a muffled cry over the internal communicator. "What's happening back there, Sale? Marty?" he demanded. He was answered by Marty's deep voice. "Clean headshot, Commander Jaeger. Sale's dead." Everything was anarchy. Jaeger watched the marauders twisting and weaving, trying to shake off the much quicker Orc craft. The enemy was everywhere, the fighter bombers looping around the squadron, unleashing hail after hail of fire from their cannons. Arik's voice filled the internal link. "Come on, scum! Yeah, just a little closer. Take that! Damn, just winged him! Oh, you hungry for some as well, filth? Emperor, these scum are slippery." Jaeger pushed the marauder into a steep dive, the mass of the Orc hulk sliding across his field of vision through the canopy. He saw Drake's marauder tailed by a trio of fighter bombers and realised the first attack wave had been reinforced by more of the Orc craft. Glancing down at the onboard scanner, he realised that the bomber's sensor array were damaged and hadn't picked up the new arrivals. The flickering amber red lights across the whole panel showed that nearly all the plane's systems were in need of serious repair. Glancing over his shoulder, Jaeger could make out Ferrex clamouring around the gloom, frantically rewiring cables and sealing split pipelines, muttering prayers all the while. Turning his attention back to the outside, he watched helplessly as a volley of fire from the Orc shredded the tail of Drake's Marauder. But then, without warning, the fighter bombers trailing Jake exploded in widening blasts of twisting metal. A moment later, 3 Imperial Thunderbolts screamed through the clouds of burning gas, their engines at full throttle. The comm crackled into life. "This is our leader! We have them now! Break for your target!" With a howl of relief, Jaeger opened up the engines to full and flicked the transmit rune on the comm panel. "Just in time, Dextra! Stay lucky, and I'll see you back on board." The interceptors had punched a hole in the fighter bomber squadrons, leaving the route clear for the bombers to proceed towards their destination. Jaeger banked his aircraft across the head of the opening, his eyes fixed on the huge Orc vessel ahead. "Raptor Squadron, this is Raptor Leader," Jaeger announced over the squadron frequency, trying to keep his voice calm, despite the trepidation and pounding heart. "Follow me in." "Check missile and bomb links," Jaeger ordered the squadron behind him. Bernhardt touched a pair of runes and frowned as they failed to light up. Snarling, the bombardier brought his fist down sharply on the display and grinned cheerfully as his face was bathed in green light. He looked towards Jaeger and gave a thumbs up. "This is Raptor Leader," Jaeger broadcast to the squadron. "Prepare for bombardment on primary objective." As a series of affirmations came across the comms link, Jaeger gave a quick smile to himself. They'd got through. Not all of them, admittedly, but hopefully they'd get the opportunity to revenge Sale, Yerrel, and the others. "Look at the size of that beast!" A Rafer awed voice came over the ether. "Let's talk, men. Stay sharp," Jaeger interrupted. "We come too far to mess it up now." Despite his stern words, Jaeger could understand the other pilot's feelings. The Hulk was truly massive, dwarfing even the majestic size of the Divine Justice, and the squadron moved closer and closer to the target. And the Hulk grew larger and larger in their sights. Jaeger could make out more details. He could see where 3 or perhaps 4 different starships had been compacted together, forming outcrops of twisted metal, jutting at a bizarre angle, and where innumerable other craft and asteroids had been compressed together by the tides of warp space to form the central mass of the drifting Hulk. It looked like a gigantic wedge of crumpled and torn metal and rock, the size of a city, weighing untold millions of tons. How the Orcs managed to populate one of these randomly wandering behemoths, the Emperor alone knew. That they could was bad enough, but when the green-skinned savages managed to activate dormant engines or build their own immense drives, that turned an uncontrollable, erratic menace into a dire threat. The bulk of the Orc vessel shimmered with the frozen particles that encrusted its hull. Billowing gases vented from unseen ports, creating a wreath of lazily moving smog around the Hulk's huge girth. It had a kind of savage beauty, a racked sculpture of tortured metal that somehow seemed to be cleaving elegantly across the stars. Jaeger's thoughts hardened. Inside that bizarre, sprawling shell were thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of Orcs, waiting to devastate some planet, to spill across continents in a wave of wanton destruction and killing. He remembered what happened to the Imperial Retribution, and pictured Sale's corpse and a sealed gunnery chamber behind him. All thoughts of beauty slipped from his mind immediately. The Hulk was a threat to the Emperor's domain, a stain upon the galaxy. It was his duty to destroy it. Checking the target data scrolling across a small, dull, low view screen just above his head, Jaeger banked the Marauder in towards the Hulk to assume the best attack trajectory. Raptor Squadron, this is Raptor Liga, Jaeger growled, turning over the attack pattern of his head. Praise the Emperor, it's our time. The Marauder sped across the chaotic hull of the Orc hulk, diving low to swoop beneath the ruined gantries, swerving around twisted columns. With the Marauders this close, the defence turrets had little time to react to their presence, sending up a harmless spray of energy bolts and shells seconds too late. Jaeger started to chant the mantra that would ease his mind into union with the aircraft he controlled. He would rely solely upon instinct rather than thought. He and the bomber acting and reacting as a single entity. As he felt his mind slipping into the semi-subconscious state he required for total concentration, Jaeger glanced over to see Bernhard launched over the targeting screen, his fingers unconsciously adjusting the rows of dials below to get the focus and magnitude correct. Guiding the Marauder across the Hulk surface with one hand, Jaeger activated a series of runes and the canopy in front of him darkened slightly as it interfaced with the Marauder's artificial eyes and ears. A false image of outlines and silhouettes imposed itself over the view through the shield, highlighting particular obstacles, bringing the twisted contours and angles of the Hulk surface into stark contrast for ease of navigation. Patches of static or blankness showed here and there where the Marauder's sensors were damaged or some interfering energy source was fluctuating within the Hulk itself. With Bernhard concentrating on the bombs and missiles, it was Jaeger's task to take control of the las cannon. The flight commander reached overhead and pulled a lever. With a sudden venting of quickly dissipated steam, the las cannon controls slid forward from the control panel beside Bernhard. 4 clamps locking the whole control bank into its new position alongside Jaeger. Punching a pair of buttons on the weapon control panel, with his right hand still guiding the Marauder across the obstructions ahead with his left, the flight commander activated the las cannon, and the canopy display in front of him was filled with a swirl of static. Quickly adjusting the weapon's sensor array, Jaeger returned the las cannon's full size, and the cloud of random specks coalesced into moving icons, highlighting possible targets. The blood-red rune on the primary target stood out like a guiding beacon. A procession of angles, estimated armor trajectories, and other information scrolling rapidly alongside it. Raptor Squadron, sound off current status. The flight commander ordered. Raptor 2, las cannons out, missiles and bombs online and ready to blow. Raptor 3, all systems acceptable, by the Emperor. Raptor 5, everything's in the green, set tail retros. She's handling hard, but we'll be fine. Okay, assume attack vector prime, standard diamond, Jaeger commanded. Let's not waste our chance. Jaeger slowed his breath, realizing that despite his prayers he was becoming agitated. In a few more moments they would pass over the jagged outcrop of the impacted cargo ship and would have a line to their as yet unknown target. A hum started in Jaeger's ear through the internal comm as Bernhard awakened the spirits of the Marauder's self-guided systems as they set about seeking their target. As the bomber neared its objectives and the missiles surveyors acquired the target point, the hum became even more high-pitched. Tilting the nose of the Marauder forward, Jaeger led the squadron over the wrecked cargo transport. The unidentified target came into full view. Like a bolt of unholy wrath, a ball of plasma 100 yards wide swept through the Marauder squadron, engulfing a Rafer's aircraft, leaving nothing more than a cloud of gas as globules of molten plasteel. Drake was on the comlink instantly. Emperor's blood! It's a damn gun battery! Why didn't they tell us it was a damn cannon? What the hell were they thinking of? Aren't we attacking the engines? Jaeger saw that it was true. A pair of immense guns, each a barrel wide enough to swallow Marauder, was pointing directly at the attacking bombers. Jaeger shivered with dread as he saw the scanner readout showing the energy build-up for another blast. Pull up! Jaeger cried up over the squadron frequency. "Break formation! Hit it from the other side!" As he wrenched his own plane into a steep climb, he prayed the others had reacted in time. As if he could make their aircraft move faster, make them react quicker through sheer force of will. As the marauder dispersed, another volcanic blast of energy hurtled from the cannons, blazing a path through space where seconds before the marauders had been. Jaeger thanked the Emperor for his swift guidance, but inwardly he was cursing Veniston and Crawl with all his might. Why hadn't they told Jaeger that the target was a weapon battery? How the hell did they think he was going to plan an attack properly if he wasn't made aware of the dangers? Choking back his fury, Jaeger ordered the squadron back into the attack approach, fervently praying under his breath that the huge turret didn't have enough time to transverse and get another shot at them. At this range, it could hardly miss. With agonizing slowness, the turret tracked around towards the incoming marauders. The message? Deviate. Perceived. Flashed scarlets across the left window of the canopy, and the whine of the missiles became an unbearable shriek. "Fly, sweet vengeance!" came Bernhardt's voice, quoting the words he personally inscribed onto each of the missiles as they were loaded. The salvo of fire from the other boarders joined Bernhardt's volley, and rippling waves of death that streaked towards its target on tails of flame, rapidly becoming distant specks as the missiles sped towards the gun turret. They hit home with a deadly blossom of explosions, and the view screen showed twisted hunks of metal being thrown in all directions. Escaping gases briefly caught fire in fountains of flaring light. The red target room was still active on the canopy screen. Shining brightly, just in front of Jaeger's eyes, he realised with sickening dread that the turret wasn't destroyed. It was about to open fire once more. "Las cannon and bombs!" Jaeger ordered, pressing the firing stud of his own plane's weapons with the thumb, spewing forth a salvo of energy bolts. Debris and burning vapours exploded across the Hulk's surface as the lasers tracked towards their target, until the gun turret was at the centre of the storm of beams converging from the four marauders. A warning signal floated before Jaeger, showing the turret was in position to fire again. In his mind's eye, Jaeger could imagine the huge barrels of cannons glowing with the suppressed energy inside, waiting to spit forth destruction and damnation. With a blast that flung Jaeger back in his seat, the turret exploded in a vast searing cloud of white plasma and billowing cloud of magnesium-bright vapour. Easing the controls back, Jaeger began to pull the marauder out of its dive towards the Hulk's surface. Suddenly, Drake's voice was hammering in his ear. "Control lost, Raptor Leader! I can't pull up!" Jaeger watched as Drake's marauder sped below him, dipping towards the Hulk's hull, trailing sparks and burning fuel from its damaged tail. "Get out!" Jaeger pleaded. "Get to your saviour pod!" He gave a heartfelt sigh of release as he saw the midsection marauder being punched upwards by emerging rockets, sending it spinning away from the Hulk. "Lost Burnus and Cord." Drake's voice was hoarse with sadness. The link to the pod was blocked. "Raptor Squadron, this is Veniston." The Admiral's smooth voice cut through the comms chatter. "Excellent work, boys. You can come home now." Jaeger frowned to himself in confusion. How the hell did destroying one gun turret help the divine justice against the brute? As he raged, the answer appeared on the display screen far across the rear of the Hulk. More marauders were moving in on the Behemoth's engines. The marauders of Devil Squadron. Frau hissed bitterly over the comms link. "Trust those damn devils. We do all the bleeding and they get all the glory." "Not this time, Frau," Jaeger answered. "Form up on my wing. Let's give the devils a hand." "I hear you, Raptor Leader," Frau replied happily. As the bombs and missiles of Devil Squadron erupted across one of the Hulk's immense engines, the surviving two marauders of the Raptors swept low, their las cannons picking out weak points in the armour, punching through buckled shields and twisted plates. Soon a dozen fires were blazing, and the engine ruptured with a swirling cloud of superheated matter. Explosions blossomed across the whole sector of the Hulk, and one by one each of the massive stellar drives lost power and went dim, leaving the Hulk drifting without control. As the Marauder sped back towards the Divine Justice, the cruiser was sweeping in victoriously for the kill. Wave after wave of torpedoes sped past. Jaeger adjusted the rear viewer to see the plasma's warheads, punching massive holes in the Hulk's armoured skin. Gun batteries exploded across the Hulk's vessel in bright pinpricks of light. Fire began raging across the Hulk's midsection, becoming raging infernos as the atmosphere inside the Hulk pushed out with ever-increasing pressure. As he prepared to dock, Jaeger got one last glimpse of the Hulk. Unable to manoeuvre without its main engines and helpless to resist the Imperial cruiser raking it from the rear, the Hulk was slowly deteriorating. Salvo after salvo from the Divine Justice's gun decks pounded into the Hulk, ripping off huge swathes with every broadside. Ancient reactors in the Hulk's depth began to overload, smashing open gaping holes from within. Then, the bomber passed into the shadow of the Divine Justice, and the Hulk was lost from view. Cleaned up and out of his dress uniform, Jaeger hurried to the briefing chamber. As he entered, Admiral Veniston was debriefing the Devils. Krull was there too, standing silently behind the Admiral, his face a blank mask. Jaeger listened to Veniston's praise of Devil Squadron's part in the day's victory, and what he heard set his teeth on edge. "And I can say without doubt that the whole mission was a complete success," the Admiral said. "And I am glad that it was achieved with acceptable losses." That was too much to bear. Jaeger stepped in the centre of the briefing chamber, blazing with fury. He'd already gone through too much without having to stand around while the Admiral praised the Devils' conduct and said that the Raptors' casualties simply didn't matter. "Acceptable losses?" Jaeger demanded, eyes ablaze. "What the hell do you mean, acceptable losses? I lost 15 good men on that mission while these flyboys were sitting on their carefully polished backsides waiting for their orders. 15 men lost, while 30 others watched and waited. If you had sent us all out together, we could have handled ourselves better. Damn it, you didn't even tell us what our target was, did you?" Veniston and Krull stared at Jaeger in rank disbelief, which only served to fuel his fury. "Of course," he spat, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "We're just the Raptors. We don't really count, do we? Well, I'm sorry if we're not related, Admiral, but my life is worth as much to the Emperor as that of your own kin." Krull was beside himself. "What is the meaning of this, Flight Commander?" The captain stormed, face like thunder. "How dare you speak to a senior officer like this? Call for the officer of the watch. Have Commander Jaeger taken to the brig immediately." Jaeger clamped his mouth shut with a snort and bristled in impotent fury. Without a word or look, Veniston walked from the chamber, ignoring the icy glare that the Jaeger shot him as the Admiral walked past. Jaeger felt his arm grabbed just below the elbow, and he was spun around. Lieutenant Strand was standing there, flanked by 2 ratings. "We've orders to take you down, Mr. Jaeger," he said, face impassive. Jaeger nodded, humbly, and followed them out of the briefing room. After a moment, Captain Krull caught up with the group and dismissed the lieutenant and guards with a waved hand. "You went too far, Jax," Krull stated, his voice soft, his eyes meeting the flight commander's gaze. "If you don't have respect, then you don't have anything." Krull led the flyer into one of the secondary hangars. Inside were the coffins of the dead, waiting to be ejected into space during the burial ceremony that evening. On each was an inscribed nameplate, even for those who had left no bodies behind. Gunner Sale, Raptor Squadron. Gunner Barnes, Raptor Squadron. Gunner Cord, Raptor Squadron. Commander Drake, Raptor Squadron. The row went on and on. There were 21 coffins in all. When Jaeger read the nameplate of the 16th, he stumbled back a step in shock. It read, Flight Commander Raff, Devil Squadron. He turned to Crawl. His brow knitted in confusion. I don't... Jaeger stuttered, lost for words. His anger was gone. He felt empty. The Devil's attack wasn't the easy in, easy out mission you seem to think it was, the captain said tersely. They still had to get through several Orc attack ships and the roaming fighter bombers. Raff was killed guiding his plane into the engines as one of the Orc attack ships that was blocking the Divine Justice's approach. He knowingly sacrificed himself for the completion of the task, and you'll do well to remember that with pride. Crawl stepped back between Jaeger and the coffin, forcing the flight commander to look at him. I devised the plan of attack on the engines, not the Admiral. The captain went on, relentlessly. It was me who decided the 2 waves were needed. The Raptor in first to silence the engine defense guns, picked up by the Mechanicus' scans, when the Devil to finish off the whole mission. If you'd have gone in together, would we have had any more chance of success? Would 10 Marauders have been better chance of destroying the battery? No. Don't reply. You know what I say is true. There were 2 separate targets which required 2 missions. We couldn't risk the Orcs fixing the gun turret while the Marauders were back on board rearming and refueling. It had to be done this way. Neither of the 2 squadrons had it particularly good, let me assure you. And the reason I didn't tell you it was a battery was to make sure that you didn't worry. Come, be honest. If you'd have known it was a massive gun battery, would you have been so confident? Jaeger considered the captain's argument, and he could see the logic. But that didn't alter the facts that they were sent into a situation without knowing the full risks. Taking on a massive gun battery isn't as simple as blowing up defenceless engines, sir. Jaeger protested. I knew it would be hard, and that men would die, the captain told Jaeger, his eyes showing that he understood the flight commander's concerns. As they spoke, Crawl led Jaeger out of the hangar, and they continued down to the brig. Don't you think that every time I order an attack, I don't consider the lives of my men? You had the cover from the Thunderbolts for that second fighter attack. Do you think it took so long for them to arrive? They were supposed to be escorting Devil Squadron. I didn't sign death warrants for your crews. I gave them a chance to prove themselves, to show what Raptor Squadron could really do. Lord Veniston had the chance to overrule me, knowing that his nephew was going to be having just as much of the hard time as you were, but he did not. Why the hell not? Jaeger asked with a flick of his hand. What the hell does Raptor Squadron mean to him? Raff was in the Devils, so surely his loyalty would lay there. That's not for me to say. That aside, I know that the Admiral was as keen as myself to give your squadron its chance for glory. Without your efforts, the Devils would have been obliterated by the Orc cannons, and after the Divine Justice would have been facing a fully operational enemy instead of a sitting target. Everybody realised that, including Lord Veniston. As they spoke, Crawl led Jaeger into the brig, where Lord Veniston was awaiting silently. Jaeger looked at the Admiral, and for the first time realised the pain and anguish he must be feeling. You can leave the prisoner in my care now, Captain, the Admiral said, meeting Jaeger's gaze for the first time. Veniston appeared as calm and collected as ever at first glance, with only the occasional twitch of an eyelid or lip, betraying any emotion the Admiral might be feeling at his nephew's death. As Curl bowed and left, Veniston stepped up to Jaeger and laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. While you are in here, think about what happened today. The Admiral's voice was quiet but strong. He spoke with years of authority, and for the first time since arriving on the Divine Justice, Jaeger could hear what the Admiral had to say for himself. Your enthusiasm, your dedication are laudable, his superior was saying. But you must expand your perspective. Trust your superiors. Remember always, the cause justifies the sacrifice. No mission I've ever flown or commanded in the Emperor's name was ever a waste. And while I retain my mental faculties, things will stay that way. Jaeger didn't know what to say. His mind was fuddled with post-battle exhaustion, and his thoughts were reeling, trying to make some sense of the unexpected sequence of events that had followed his outburst in the briefing chamber. "I'll think on that, sir," he managed to mumble. "Just see that you do, lad," the Admiral said, with a cursory flick of his head. Veniston directed the two attendant sentries to lead Jaeger into the small, sparse cell. As the thick, cold steel door closed behind him with an echoing clang, Jaeger's thoughts were troubled. He had sat on a small bunk and hung his head in his hands. What did Veniston mean, no mission I've ever flown? In his head, he could not shake a small detail, barely glimpsed as the Admiral was taking his hand from Jaeger's shoulder. Jaeger looked down at his black gauntlets, part of the flight commander's uniform required by regulations. Veniston had been wearing black gloves too, each with a small insignia. Picked out in delicate gold thread on Veniston's gloves had been an eagle rampart, the unmistakable sign of Raptor Squadron. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I hoped you enjoyed listening to that as much as I did reading it. It's such a cool story. It's a short story, and let me just tell you a bit about this material. So, it's a Warhammer 40,000 novel, published by the Black Library, of course, and it's called Into The Maelstrom, and I actually found this in a charity shop. I picked it up for 50 pence or something like that, and as far as I'm aware, I haven't heard anyone else read from this book. So listen, I all hope you really enjoyed it. I hope to be doing more of these in the future. Please, if you enjoyed it, hit the like button. Let me know what you think. I always enjoy feedback. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. The Emperor Protects.